All units, brace yourselves. We're going down.
Starlink Battle for Alice is a new game from Ubisoft Toronto that combines a very light space sim shooter with a ground-based sandbox shooter, all combined into a seamlessly explorable galaxy. The first thing I noticed when I started playing this game was how much it reminded me of cartoons that I watched when I was a kid. Now, these cartoons often had diverse casts and were also often just half-hour-long commercials for toys. I'm talking about shows like The Real Ghostbusters or Captain Simeon and the Space Monkeys. In the lead-up to release, I did not understand the Toys to Life part of this game. I did not understand why it existed after what happened with LEGO Dimensions and Disney Infinity and Skylanders, but once I saw that this game is very much inspired by these shows from the 80s and 90s, that all fell into place. But let's talk about those toys. They're sold in two different ways. There's the physical option, which gives you an actual toy with a model of a spaceship, a pilot, and some weapons that you can slot onto the ship, and all of these interact with your controller for whatever your platform is. I'm mostly talking about the Switch version here. Now, these are quite pricey. The physical starter version is $75 in the US and comes with a ship, 2 pilots, 2 weapons, and another ship that's digital and a weapon that's digital. Now, you can access these through a menu in-game rather than using the toy itself to slot it onto your ship. The digital options are much cheaper. The digital basic is $60, just like any other AAA game that you would buy today brand new, and comes with a lot more variety of ships and pilots and weapons. You just slot all of these onto your ship in-game using the menu, just like you do with your digital selections if you're playing with the physical toys. But it's much cheaper. It's $60, that's $15 cheaper, and comes with much more variety of weapons. If you go for the digital deluxe edition, which comes with everything that's currently available to use in-game, it's $80. It's only $5 more than the starter edition costs. But if you buy all of those toys, including the starter edition, it all adds up to over $200. The pricing on this is really yikes, and even though I understand the inspiration of it now, coming from those merchandise-driven cartoons of the 80s and 90s, the specter of the Toys to Life crash is still upon us. I think this is going to be a big bomb for Ubisoft. Now, the choice comes down to, do you want to get the physical toys or do you want to go for the digital option? And I am going to talk about that a little bit. It's really important to have variety, which is why I opted to go for the digital version, because I wasn't going to spend that much money to have more toys to play with so I could have a greater variety of weapons, especially since I wouldn't even get an opportunity to demo those toys in advance to find out really what they do. It would be literally guessing from an item description if it would be something that I wanted. And it's really important to have a variety of weapons because the weapons do combo together. I very quickly found that I liked using one of my guns that creates this giant black hole, and another gun that shoots a burst of flame, and when these two elements touch, it actually creates a giant black hole that sucks in enemies and then burns them with fire damage. It's a really effective weapon in planetary-based combat, and I only found this combo because I had access to all of the weapons because I got the digital version of the game. If I had gone for the toys, first of all, in the starter edition, you don't even have that black hole weapon. You just get a flame and an ice weapon and a basic shredder gun that just fires bullets. Now, these are enough to get you through the game. The fire and the ice weapon will let you open most of the doors in the game and let you exploit most of the elemental weaknesses that you encounter. But the variety just is not there, and if you don't like the fire or the ice weapon that comes in the starter pack, I certainly didn't like the ice weapon that it came with, you're gonna have a bad time, and your only option is to buy more toys to play with. So you find yourself in a situation where if you're buying the wrong toys because you really have no idea what they do unless you do a lot of research online, and even then, you haven't actually played with them yet, so who knows if you'll like them in the first place. And weapons I liked in planetary combat, I found less effective in space, and vice versa. So when I'm in a planetary zone and I'm working under the function of gravity, so enemies can only attack me from the front and from behind, and they can't move around very much to get away from my projectiles, I found my black hole weapon extremely effective. But when I got into space combat, and we've got enemies moving and attacking from literally every possible direction, front, back, side to side, top, and down, I found homing missiles worked a lot better. If I didn't have access to these weapons, if I had gone for the physical version of the game, I would be having a much more miserable time, and I would be having a much more negative tone right now. Probably the worst thing that I encountered, however, was at one point in space, I was experimenting with my weapons and seeing which one I liked to use in space, and I found one that I had a talking head come up and tell me, literally, don't use that weapon here.
You might want to try a different weapon. Shockwave's range is too short out there in space.
Imagine if I had actually spent money for the toy that this came with, not knowing what that toy did, and then I get into the game and I use it, and the game tells me not to use it. I would be very mad, and I think I'm not alone in saying that. This toy thing is a disaster. My strong recommendation is, unless you have the money on hand to shell out to buy all of the toys, go for the digital standard edition or even the digital deluxe edition, which only costs $5 more than the physical standard. The value is much greater, and you're probably going to have less of a headache as a result of it. And of course, the most famous thing about Starlink revealed at the last E3 is that in the Nintendo Switch version of the game, Star Fox is a starring character. Now, the concern was that he was going to be a glorified skin. Luckily, this is not the case. The Star Fox team is integrated into the storyline. They do appear in cutscenes, although mostly in the background because you can tell that they were incorporated into already existing storylines. However, when you are flying around in space or on the planets, and all of the conversations are just happening with audio with an accompanying talking head appearing on the screen, the Star Fox team is very well integrated into these conversations. They talk to each other, they talk to the Starlink team, they feel like they're actually present and existing in this story. And they're not just there for no reason, just as Nintendo branding. They have a reason to be in the Atlas system. They are looking for Wolf O'Donnell. I've only been playing for about 10 hours, so I haven't gotten very far into that plotline. I don't know what's going on with Wolf, but they do have a reason to be here, beyond just being guest characters in this new game from Ubisoft. Now, of course, Starlink Battle for Atlas is developed and published by Ubisoft, and it is an Ubisoft sandbox game with all that implies. You land on a new planet and your map is completely blank until you go and you activate a tower, which in Starlink is actually an observatory. And the more observatories you unlock and the more you level up your observatories, the more of your map is revealed. The map reveals different GPS tokens, which marks different activities. Most of these activities are drawn from the same pool of activities that recur on every planet. It's not to say that it's exactly the same as every other Ubisoft game, because every Ubisoft sandbox game, they are unique and unto themselves. But the design philosophy is still familiar, and nothing here is going to surprise you. There is a certain amount of grinding incorporated into this Ubisoft adventure. As I said, when you get to an observatory, you can also spend time upgrading it by doing quests or turning in pickups that will increase its range. You can also do the same thing with refineries that will send you currency called Electrum every 15 minutes. I spent a few hours capping all of the refineries on the first planet, and very soon I had more money than I knew what to do with. I can only assume that this process compounds itself as time goes on, where I'm going from getting hundreds of thousands of credits every 15 minutes to getting millions every 15 minutes. We'll see what happens. The entire game world does exist as a single seamless galaxy, which is the Atlas system. The planets exist as your typical Ubisoft sandboxes, but once you get the ability to fly in the first half hour of the game or so, and you can leave the atmosphere, that lets you travel out into space to travel between planets at hyperspeed. And there's also space battles and enemy bases to attack in space as well. I've heard this compared to No Man's Sky, but unfortunately I've not played No Man's Sky. But the game that I have played that this sequence reminded me very strongly of was actually the hyperspace travel in Rebel Galaxy. So if you've played that, you know what to expect here. There are multiple difficulties that you can choose from. I went for the basic difficulty, but there are 2 difficulties higher than that. But I've noticed even on the basic difficulty that there are widely disparate challenges based on what you're doing. Almost everything that I did planet side was almost laughably easy. I was regretting the difficulty I picked for some time. Then I got into outer space. And this is probably just a result of me not really knowing how to dogfight, because I'm not really into these space sim things, which I would say Starlink is definitely a space sim, even if it is a fairly light one. I found myself very quickly having all of my energy drained away, and energy is used to dodge and boost and also power your shield. And once that was gone, I basically got whittled down by all these little snub fighters. I found the best way to counter it was to do the 180-degree turn, where you do a very short pull up and then fly back in the opposite direction you were flying. That was a good way of disrupting enemies, but it didn't really do much to line me up to shoot back at them. I missed the loop that you can do in Star Fox 64, where you do the loop and then Wolf says his line,
What the heck?
I'm looking for how to do that, but I haven't found out how to do it, because the controls are explained very piecemeal in this game. They really only tell you how to do a control when you've reached a certain milestone, even though quite often I've found that having that information earlier would have been much more useful. The controls are serviceable, they're not that hard to figure out, and there's a pretty good user interface that tells you what all of your commands are at any given time, but the advanced movements, if they even exist, I haven't found out how to do them yet. It's very confounding. I've been a little disappointed with that aspect of the game. As I said, I've been playing the Nintendo Switch version, which is obviously not as graphically robust as the PlayStation 4, Xbox One versions. I've looked at comparison videos, and certainly there are fewer environmental objects on each planet, like trees. Just having less for the system to render there probably helps it to run a lot better. The colors are also a lot less vibrant, and that would really help to sell some of these alien planets that I've landed on. Like the first one you spend a lot of time on has some really interesting colors in its wildlife, purples and pinks and oranges, but those colors, I could tell that's what the colors were, but the colors just weren't as intense as I felt they could be. And another thing I noticed is when you are flying through the atmosphere of a planet, but you're not yet in space, there's a lot of fogging, and it really limits the draw distance. I don't spend too much time flying, so it's not that annoying, but I think when I get later into the game, and I'm going to spend more time flying longer distances on planets, that will probably become an issue. All of this, however, was probably done to increase the performance of the game, and I really didn't notice any performance hitches. I played it for about 9 hours in TV mode, and I played it for about an hour in handheld mode. Handheld mode ran great, couldn't notice any differences from the TV mode in terms of performance. Pretty happy with how it performs on the Switch. Any game that you see that's going to be multi-platform between PS4, Xbox One, and Switch is going to be graphically inferior on the Switch. It's just the nature of the platform for most games. You can complain about that. It can be a ding against it if you're a kind of person where the graphic design is really important to you, but it hasn't bothered me all that much here. So my first impressions of Starlink Battle for Atlas is that it's a fun, if obvious, Ubisoft sandbox game. Ubisoft's design philosophy is very prevalent here. And the toys, I don't understand them. I guess if you're a toy collector, that might be marketed at you, but I really don't know how many there are, and I doubt that there are enough to justify the existence of these toys in the first place. Just go for the digital version, that way you're not spending so much money, and you have a variety of things to experiment with rather than just being stuck with the starter edition pack-ins and whatever toys you managed to find in whatever location you bought them at. You save yourself a lot of money, and you save yourself the headache of swapping them in and out on the toy rather than just using the in-game menu. But I think the game itself does hold up, especially if you're looking for a new adventure with the Star Fox team, or you're just looking for a cool sandbox game for your Switch. We haven't seen actually any, I think, from Ubisoft on the Switch. I think this is the first genuine Ubisoft sandbox game on Switch, and that's a pretty important milestone because as much as we like to complain about these games, they are pretty big games and they're big sellers, and them being on the Switch is a big deal. We should definitely support that. So thank you for watching this first impressions video of Starlink Battle for Atlas. If you go to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/playcritically, you can see my complete livestream archive of playing through this game as well as many others, and also my forthcoming video for final impressions of Starlink. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you again.
Never thought I'd miss the food on Corneria.